Hello, DerbyCon. Let's kick this off. Stable Talks. I think I'm actually the keynote for Stable Talks, or at least it'll say that on my LinkedIn profile. Anyhow, my name's Sam Sayen. I'll be giving a talk today about red teaming, gaps, and musings. Just make sure you're in the right talk. I assume some of the people actually want to be here and they just didn't miss out on Josh Pitt's talk. The room wasn't full. All right. All right, so I guess first I want to get out of the way what this talk is about. It's kind of developed ever since I got the talk approved, and it morphed a little bit, but I've been trying to keep it basically with the summation. I've spent about an equal amount of time on the offensive and defensive side, and doing so has kind of given me a bit of a look into how things are done by the real big boys, the APTs, Russia, China, what have you not. And as well as how our current red teaming is done, at least for a couple within the government, for my limited view, and within the private sector as well. So over the last couple of years, a few things have become apparent with how things are actually different. And I just kind of wanted to highlight how it's not really a level playing field in a lot of ways, and some of the ways that we can possibly, as red teamers, as security people, try to mix it up and try to make it a little bit more realistic. And also, I did a Google search and nothing came back for my talk idea, so I assumed it was new. As you can see, second hit was, what's the difference between brown, green, and red lentils? I think the color. All right, a little bit about my background. I started off, well, actually, I rode the first .com crash when I was a teenager. Rode that all the way to the ground. Remember getting paid off in a back alley by my company so that I wouldn't tell other companies our company was going under. From there, I went into the Air Force, and I had a job where we phone tapped ourselves for OPSEC purposes, and making sure we weren't leaking stuff. Pretty boring job, but I got to go to the Navy's hacking school back in the time, which wasn't particularly advanced. Back in 2003, literally, they were giving us back Orifice and telling us to run it. Then I went actually a mechanical engineer, but I haven't used it a day in my life. I went into the State Department Foreign Service, which I recommend you check out if you want to travel the world. Some pretty cool classes. Learned how to do lock picking, cutting into the safes, breaking into the doors. A lot of it sounds kind of like spook stuff, but I assure you it was not. You cut into a safe because someone accidentally lost the money for the cashier in there, so you get a surface grinder or whatever, you cut into a $1,000 safe and you pull out $200 and you consider it a job well done. But I was able to quickly figure out that I wanted to focus on cyber again. So I got back into the computer side of things. I never did any of the physical stuff out in the field. So I went and worked in the SOC in Virginia. I went and worked for the Red Cell, or Red Team as you typically call it. And eventually I ended up at a threat hunting job out of Virginia. For basically just their hunt team. I also did 2 years overseas in the Foreign Service, where I was based out of the consulate in Frankfurt, and I traveled around the world doing kind of on-site assessments at embassies and consulates. So you get to see a lot of messed up stuff out there. Interesting job. Currently I've been with Mandiant for about 2 years, doing about 100% proactive. I did a little bit of IR stuff at the beginning, but pretty much all pen testing, red teaming since then. Definitely a top-notch group of consultants there. Every day I learned something. A lot of guys who are way better red teamers than me, so it's awesome. Background on SEO history, I thought was kind of interesting. The job was born out of the mess-up, which was the original embassy, well, not the original, but embassy consulate construction in Moscow back in the day that was absolutely riddled with bugs. And so they handed us over a consulate to use, which we couldn't even use. So basically they tore it apart, found all the bugs, and realized, oh, hey, maybe we actually need to figure out how to do security engineering. So that's how the job got started. Just to get things started, these are cherry-picked definitions from Wikipedia and my own personal ideas. And just also I should put in a disclaimer, this talk is all my own ideas and nothing that's necessarily backed by Mandiant or FireEye. ABT, for the sake of this talk, I'm just going to say an attacker with a high level of skill, intent, and importantly, resources. Right? I mean, an attacker is only going to be as advanced as they have to. If they're attacking a low security organization, they're just going to send a couple spear phishing messages and get in, something that someone could do with a $5 Droplet with DigitalOcean and a couple open source tools. But on the other end of the spectrum, it takes a lot of time, money, resources, and physical access in some cases. Just as background from Mandiant and their IR team, median dwell time for compromise, 101 days. That includes self-reported and, say DHS or the FBI tells a company that they're compromised. So that's just across the spectrum, across the globe. Typical red team, at least what I've experienced, 3 to 5 weeks. And the idea is to simulate real-world attacks. So keeping that in mind, that's the basis of my talk, is how do we simulate real-world attacks when we do not have the same resources. Limiting factors. The big one, I think, is time. Definitely red team, 3 to 6 weeks. In there is usually reporting. Maybe some of you guys are in-house red teamers for a corporation, and you can do multi-month engagements. That's not the case, at least for consultants. Tooling. Definitely a lot of the APTs have dedicated developers. They're not the operators of the hands-on computer on compromised workstations. You actually have real good programmers. Definitely, it's not always the same skill set. Someone who can make a good rat, a Trojan, is not necessarily a good person who's hands-on keyboards inside a network, practicing good OPSEC. So you have dedicated groups, tooling, and support. Infrastructure. APTs are very well known for using compromised websites, using like extremely complex C2 that extracts a bit.ly link from Instagram and pulls that link, then uses a Yahoo API to generate the next stage to obfuscate and make it more difficult for the good guys to find them. Most red teaming that I've found, you don't really have to worry about that, or you don't worry about that because you're only there for a couple weeks and you basically need to get the job done. So you don't have time making all these convoluted C2 infrastructure plans with 6 phases of redundant backup and dynamically generated Twitter algorithms that are pulling steganography of PNG. But for the APTs, sometimes that's necessary if you want to be compromising a company for a year or so. Legal and scope is also a big one. Basically, the red team has both of those issues. You have legal and scope issues, whereas a real APT, they have maybe scope of their boss telling them, hey, only compromise this company because we're focused on getting this information. But yeah, if they compromise one company and they see they credentials to another company, go nuts, cross over into that other company, compromise them, come back over. I mean, really, the sky's the limit, whereas a red team has a very predefined scope. You can only compromise XYZ. Maybe you can't even compromise their cloud services, and that is, the company that you're targeting, they're using them, but you can't even go that far because, they didn't get the sign-off with Amazon. So just to start things off here, I want to demonstrate a couple big hacks that have happened. Most of these are not recent, but I definitely think they're impressive. Phineas Fisher hack of Hacking Team. That one was, I think, a couple years, 2016, April. Basically, the cool thing about it was that he realized his target was not going to be vulnerable to spear phishing, or likely not vulnerable. So he had the time and the resources to figure out what was exposed. Turns out, there was an embedded device that was exposed externally, which didn't have any published exploits for it, so he developed a 0-day. What red team's going to do that on a 3 to 6 week engagement? And say you're 4 weeks into your engagement and you realize, oh crap, I'm not coming up with a 0-day. You think the customer's going to be happy when you write them a report that says, oh yeah, I spent 3 weeks looking for a 0-day, didn't find one, sorry, catch you next time. You can't take risks like that. You're not DARPA. You can't just go down these rabbit holes and then find out it's a dead end. Time is money. They expect a product from you, so you can't feasibly look for 0 days. Maybe you work for an agency or the military and you have a few 0 days in your pocket that you can use internally, but for the most of us that are on the outside, that's not really feasible. So just to confirm here what I was saying, he developed a 0-day, tested it in a lab, used the 0-day, got in, and then from there spread within the hacking team's network, exfilled all their information, all without ever alerting them by sending a single spear phishing message or doing any social engineering. No easy breach. This was also briefed by Mandiant about a couple years ago, 2016, DerbyCon, the Russians, APT 29. Total tally at the end, 1,039 compromised systems, but the important thing I took away from this was over 1,000 unique malware samples. Granted, some of those are minor modifications, but each one of those was designed to, get around any sort of strict AV-based detection. no red team's going to do this feasibly. Definitely not on a shorter engagement. You might get caught and get evicted. That would be the end of it. Whereas these guys had the time to put unique samples out there across the entire target environment. They also had backup they used crypto and they used backup C2. So the C2 was hard to extract from the malware samples. So they tried to breach them. They didn't get breached. They came back with a vengeance. And I think they used one of the big ones that they didn't catch initially was Twitter with Stego on the PNGs that were being posted on Twitter. This one didn't really get a lot of press, I don't think, but this is actually probably my favorite one. This is one of the guys that was indicted by the FBI, and in short, he compromised an engineer of his target company's personal website, which that guy was hosting at home on a virtual machine. Once he compromised that, it was a WordPress exploit. He did an SSH grinding attack to get out of that VM to compromise the host OS. From there, he was able to get the VPN certificate and private keys to then authenticate into the engineering DevNet of the target company. From there, eventually he ended up compromising, I think, several million credentials. So this was part of the big Yahoo hack. But the method of getting in there, no red teamer would ever possibly find this method because you can't go after someone's personal website on your way in. Just talking about scope constraints. A big one when I was in the government, things are starting to focus on personal email. Why wouldn't you focus on personal email? Right? When you're targeting an organization, you have everything going in through their full security stack. It's going in through all their threat stuff, which is scraping links, blah, blah, blah. It's going, maybe into Einstein if you're the government. It's going in and out. It's getting analyzed. It's getting onto the Splunk dashboard of the hunt team, et cetera, et cetera. But you can just send an email to someone's personal account, and they're going to check it at work on the same target system that you're trying to go after. And maybe they're doing man in the middle on the SSL. But have you ever tried to parse Gmail? It's not that easy, even if you are decrypting it. So I definitely see a big reason why APTs are moving towards personal email. Another one is that, say you can target someone, you get in, you get their stuff. They had sensitive information on there. Why would that person ever want to go talk to their security people and say, hey, I think my personal email was breached, and I had our government stuff in there? There's no reason to. You're basically narking on yourself. So, I mean, in the case here of John Brennan, who got his personal account popped, I guess the reason to do it is you want to get it out before WikiLeaks does. But other than that, there's really no reason to self-report. And many organizations don't even want to hear about you getting phished on your personal email. You're checking it at work. But if you get a phishing account to your personal email, they've got better things to do, so they don't want it. These are some plausible APT actions. Some of these have been done, obviously. This is kind of just me thinking outside the box, but also with my background, I think most of these are realistic. Number one would be actually start a legit front company. I always wanted a soundtrack. It's perfect. So start a front company. Start a legitimate company that does real work. And on the side, you can actually go out and get contracts to your target networks, and then they give you access. Right? The target breach, what was it? It was an HVAC company that allowed them in. So you can actually go through third parties to get in. You can actually be the third party. You don't have to compromise them. Intercept hardware. This is a big one that came out with the Snowden leaks. I don't know. For some reason, it was a big revelation at the time, but it should be pretty, I guess, assumed that hardware can be intercepted, particularly if you're in another country where you don't have maybe the FBI looking to keep other people away from your stuff. Right? We put a lot of trust in the post office. How much trust do you put in the international shipping companies? Install devices in hotel networks. I actually made this slide before. I have a slide coming up that was about the GRU revelations that just came out yesterday. But Dark Hotel, the North Korean actors, they were using this for a long time. And I think pretty much every APT has to be targeting every hotel network where they know people stay of high value. Like, why wouldn't you? Internet cafes. This one, of course, I think is a little bit dated because most people aren't using them anymore, but in third world countries, for sure. Second world. This picture here is from, I was in Morocco in 2016, and there's still cyber cafes. I mean, there's a good joke that basically the fastest way to get your data into an agency server farm is to use a cyber cafe. More ideas for scope that I guess are kind of plausible that I came up with on my own, which would be to just develop a browser extension. We have plenty of malicious actors out there who are going out and they're actually just trying to buy Chrome extensions. Like, say you have 200,000 people using it and they say, hey, I'll give you 10K. I want to take over development of it. Then they can push their own code out. That seems kind of unneeded. If you're an APT, just make a browser extension. It's not like you're a vetted publisher or something. Just make up a company, make an extension that abuses trust. Make legit Android apps. We only catch the really crappy ones that are trying to check for like root privilege escalation on your phone, which I don't know why they do that. I mean, you already have all the legitimate access you need to the data if you make a decent app and then spread from there. Data recovery. Something came out recently in the news about this one as well. A lot of companies will go under and they'll just get their whole data server farm, you know, basically seized. And then they'll go up for auction. No one's doing data sanitization on that stuff. So you can actually go out there and just buy it and then scrape all the data you want and then get whatever third-party access you might need. You can also just go on eBay, look for old racks, stuff like that. Go scrape all the creds off there and then, you know, go sell them after you take the stuff and then, you know, put that money back in the pot, rinse and repeat. Start a CDN. This one I've always wanted to do. I actually owned a fake CDN for a little while there. It looks like some other illegitimate people bought it after I dropped it, but basically everyone's running tons and tons of packed JavaScript off of these third-party CDNs, and nobody's really checking hashes or properly using any sort of CSP on those. You know, you can only target like exact areas. So basically the idea is you have data centers spread out all over the world, and then you can target someone based on their location, so you get the people who are closest to you. I mean, this is like an agency or an APT wish list. You have selective targeting, basically like the equivalent of gates, to deliver packed JavaScript to people based on where they are. That's what I would do. 24-port elephant in the room. Core infrastructure. Once again, Snowden revelations brought a lot of information on this. But I think for the most part, we kind of forgot about it. Obviously, slide coming up, talk about what just came out in the news yesterday as well with the whole Apple snafu. But that's a CVE details info on Cisco. If you notice, the code execution vulnerabilities just keep climbing every year. And it's very hard for anyone to patch these. And so they're exposed, they're on the peripheral, nobody really monitors them, there's no endpoint protection on them, there's no EDR. You can't really determine whether or not they're good or bad. You can, you know, flash out the firmware or whatever, but if it's a chip or whatever, and who's really doing that? Maybe some people who are really security paranoid are actually swapping out the firmware. But also procurement. If you're overseas, a lot of multinational companies, right? They're in the US and they're overseas. So how are you getting that stuff overseas? Do you have 24/7 control of your environment, or are you leasing a place from a place that, you know, what, they're not going to play ball with their host nation? They have to. I mean, it'd be like us saying, like, no, screw you, FBI. I'm not going to let you into your. Yeah, I mean, you're going to do it. So for companies that are all over the world, this is definitely a concern. I don't see. Here you have an X-ray of a computer. And the State Department, we use to X-ray stuff, look for you know, any sort of embedded listening devices, stuff like that. But if anything's electronic, you can't. There's nothing you can do. All you can do is securely procure it. So just some thoughts on that. This is the one I was talking about. The big caveat, though, is that email. I mean, Apple has denied all of this, so I don't know how much we want to put stock in it, but I think it's definitely plausible. I think it's curious that, what was it, like 6 government officials spoke anonymously. I quit. On the record, saying that this was real, and then Apple's saying it's completely false. So my guess is that it's somewhere in the gray, and then maybe Apple's just denying it because they didn't get some of the details right. But basically, there's a chip put onto a device which was used by a lot of the, you know, higher security companies, including Apple, Amazon, used for streaming, and that was a back door. So I don't know where they got the information and why Apple would deny that. They said they're not under a gag order, but who knows. But definitely hardware compromises are something that are very real and possible, and we just don't hear about them. Another October 4th headline. This one I just put into the deck 5 minutes before the talk began. Basically, we put in, that's not an indictment, but we're charging the Russian operators Fancy Bear that we're going after the anti-doping. Oh man, 5 minutes left. So too long. The short of it is they use specialized equipment to get after hard targets. So when you can't fish them, go there. Physically get on the network, compromise them, get on the Wi-Fi. Has anyone here run responder on a hotel network? Don't raise your hand. Overcoming imaginary scope restraints. Basically, just, when a client says, oh, I can't do this, try to ask them, like, why can't you do this? Is it just that they don't want to? They don't feel like they should? Like, oh, you can't fish this guy, he's too important. Like, yeah, that's exactly why I should fish him, right? And they say, oh, you can't actually go out there and attack us after 5 p.m. on Friday because we want to have it all clear for the weekend. Threat actors know that. So they will fish on the weekends or at the end of the day. So I'm going to skip a little bit of stuff here. Replicate hardware compromises. Try to scan the network from a MAC address that's a VoIP phone. See if anyone notices. We once brought down a whole VLAN link because we ran Bloodhound from a Cisco phone. I don't recommend it, but they didn't notice because it was a security issue. They noticed because production is like, hey, what the hell? Our whole we can't make phone calls. Abuse the cloud. Definitely check out PwnAuth. I have some links at the end. Abuse it. It's out there. Everyone's using it. Don't necessarily do credential harvesting. Do OAuth harvesting. It looks legitimate. It's hard as hell to spot the fake ones. But this got me thinking, like, what is red teaming? It's adversary simulation. So the closest thing that red teaming really can get to adversary simulation may be skipping the phishing, right? Because they can have all these different avenues to get in. It's the phishing and the outside stuff that we're limited on. We can't go do physical compromises to get in the network. We can't use compromised infrastructure to phish them. But everything once we get in the network is almost the same. So internal red teaming's a thing that our company's been doing for a little while. Initially I thought it was crap. I thought the idea meant like, oh, we're not doing real red teaming. This is like pen testing light. Maybe you don't do Nessus scans. But in the end, I think there may be more value added for the customer. You spend a lot of time obfuscating payloads, going back and forth, and in the end, basically they say like, oh, my company, we pay big money to this CrowdStrike, FireEye, whoever, and they didn't detect your payload. What do we do? And the company says, okay, yeah, we detect it now. Like, all right, and maybe they found like, a 4-byte magic detection or a hash detection. That didn't really gain them anything. And then it was phishing. The people are trained through PhishMe and whatever. Hover over a link, see if it's different. Nobody does that anymore. Like, oh, check to see if the actual sender is the same as the email address says it. Nobody does that. Like all the things that people are trained to do to avoid phishing, we don't do anymore. We actually just go ahead and register a legitimate domain or use something like Gmail. I use Proton Mail, things like that. And they say like, oh, well, make sure you don't click on links or download stuff. Like, okay, I'm going to phish the recruiter. Tell the recruiter not to download documents. Like, good luck. So my point is that there's not a lot that companies can do to protect them from the outside. And an APT or an advanced attacker is going to get in. So it's almost pointless to waste those 1 out of 3 or 2 out of 5 weeks just trying to get in the network. The value that you can provide to the company is once you're already inside the network, because the attacker's going to get inside. This comes back to the whole assume breach mentality. So I really think that a lot of our time's wasted on the outside. I like making obfuscated payloads more than the next guy, but at the end, what does that really get the customer? You tell them, haha, I got in, you didn't detect this, but in the end, they don't really get a lot of value from that. So it's once you get in the network. So time is money. Maybe they're, getting billed $400 an hour and you just wasted a week and a half getting phishing scenarios approved and building payloads. So yeah, I think I just puked all that up in the last 2 minutes to make the deadline. So yeah, thank you. Enjoy the con. And while we are still red teaming from the outside, here's a lot of links of tools that I use personally to obfuscate payloads, conduct phishing. A lot of it can help automate it, speed it up. Right?
Have you ever started a red team with the client giving you access?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, we're starting to do that more often. And all the times, maybe you give them a payload, and don't waste time obfuscating all that crap because you can do that anyway. Just tell them to whitelist it and run it. And then you can still use Cobalt Strike, whatever you're... Right, exactly, yeah. A lot of times, though, they try to sell internals as, oh, it's an internal pen test, so we want you to run a Nessus scan. and they're not testing the sock anymore. And they're like, oh yeah, we detected you on day one. Well, like, yeah, you told me to run a Nessus scan. So some clients have started to actually request internal red teams. At first I thought it was kind of crappy because they're just trying to save money by cutting a couple weeks off the engagement. But in the end, I think the same value. I don't really have customers gain that much from the actual phishing and stuff. Like, I mean, I'm always going to target someone and someone's going to let me in, and that person's not going to get fired, as well as they shouldn't. So in the end, it's like, okay, we got phished. Like, what can we do? Like, you can get around every proxy out there. I mean, you can just register mail.junk domain, blah, 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 and you get around Blue Coat. It automatically classifies it as mail. So, I mean, there's plenty of workarounds. I don't think there's a lot to be gained from the external stuff, to be honest. It's when you're in there. That doesn't mean you shouldn't use maybe some malware once you're inside the domain, but just that initial getting the foothold and all that, I think, to a degree, just taking that step out of the way can add a lot more value to an engagement. Right. So, it makes it more of a pain in the ass. Maybe you don't use as much PowerShell and you start using more .NET assemblies, stuff like that. Definitely, if they don't have any EDR, you just go nuts with PowerShell. Usually they're not doing proper log forwarding or anything like that. So EDR definitely can cause some problems, and it takes you a little while to figure out what they have exactly, what's going on. Like, you get that foothold with your malware, and you take a screenshot, and it shows CrowdStrike or HX running in the background. You send it to the client, and they like crap themselves. But I mean, in the end, everything can. I mean, networks are so noisy; it's hard for them to really get good visibility, and there's always a way around. So, and AV's a joke. Everybody knows that. Stop. All right, thanks.